All right. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Wisam. He's my brother. You want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
So
I'm
you are
Usama's
in,
brother.
what's that?
I am Usama's brother,
You're, that's all you are.
little
Yeah,
brother.
you're my brother. I'm your brother. You're in Los Angeles and I'm in Boulder, Colorado. And
hmm
um, yeah, I just thought we'd just kind of informally chat about what happened the other day at the US Capitol, your impression of it.
Well, I think I had a paradoxical experience.
Yeah, what was that?
So one part of it was just genuine. I don't think the word horrified is right, but just dismayed and sort of disgusted by it. Um, and it was clearly like had appeared to have truly violent intentions.
Yeah.
Like, and I think there is this thing where, it's easy to say, okay, there's a sort of costume that your like average Trumper QAnon person has, which is like, militarized kind of gear and zip ties and gas masks, and it's all because they're just engaged in a kind of role play, which I agree is probably true to some degree, but at the same time, until it's not just a extravagant LARPing session, until you actually have a bunch of senators in a room and you happen to have zip ties and then you do tie them up. And, there's a sort of prognostic quality to this, so it keeps becoming more and more severe. So, I was just horrified at what could have happened, and the fact that the police, at least some of them, seem to be letting these people in.
Yeah.
So there was that experience, and then the sort of like nihilistic absurdist inside of me was like, kind of enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. What was it? Well, was it because you enjoyed it because like it's the United States of America and we just have so many just incredibly obnoxious and also just crazy ass people that the guy with the horns and the costuming and the whole kind of spectacle of it is very America. It's very American.
Yeah. No, I don't
No.
think that it's distinctly American. I think that is an attribute of all like social movements or collective action. I mean, if you like go back to the French Revolution, people dressed up,
Okay.
wore
So
costumes.
what was it?
Ceremonial component to these things.
Okay, so you just saw that as ceremonial. So what was the amused part about it?
The concrete reality that people had stormed the Capitol
Oh,
of
right.
the United States of America, and a place that if you would have told me the day before that suggested such a thing could happen, I would have laughed at you. And so
I know. Mom kept on saying, Mom was texting me. She's like, they're inside the Capitol. I'm like, come on, Mom. She's like, no, they're inside. I'm like, oh my God, they are.
And I'm not someone that glorifies politicians or is even a big believer in the political process because it's so disappointing. So there's a part of me that's just like, if this were a slightly different situation and a pluralistic group of like people from all different a bunch of different people from the ideological spectrum got together and took over the Capitol, I would be excited about it because I kind of think at some point that needs to happen. It's just that the people that happened to do it were the worst strata of our society.
Right. And if people
I don't want to see anyone get killed or hurt.
Yeah.
So there was a part of me that was like genuinely a very infantile, like pubescent part of me that was like genuinely excited about it. And I didn't like that, but I accept that it was there.
The punk in you was like, nothing is sacred, everything's permitted. Like, let them tear it down. But also it was like, it wasn't the people, they weren't folks, they would, I mean, if those folks were in charge, they would hang you too. Like they would.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Going back to what you said about the kind of dressing up for war, I used to think there was something kind of, playing army, but those same militia guys, do you remember a few summers ago when they just randomly decided just to stand in front of mosques? You remember that? It was like a whole tour of these militias, and they just went to every mosque around the nation and just stood there because they got some information that Muslims are uprising. It's funny that a lot of the paranoia and the narratives about what's happening is what they eventually ended up doing.
Yeah.
You know, that there's a secret conspiracy by left wing and Antifa that if Biden doesn't win, they're gonna riot and take over the Capitol. Well, you know. The other thing I wanted to read this from Bill Ayers, who's we're friends on Facebook. William Ayers, he was part of the Weather Underground, Chicago. He wrote a little poem. He wrote, "A mob of MAGA persuasion conducted a Capitol invasion. Though many were armed, they departed unharmed, and that's how you know they're Caucasian." So I've been thinking about this quite a bit. So I live on a very liberal, quiet street near the mountains. And a few weeks ago, we had a train of Trumpsters on my street because the governor's 90-year-old parents lived down the block. And they were like screaming at me and doing all this stuff and honking their horns. But one of the things that was not surprising, but I kept noticing, were like Black families in the whole MAGA outfits. And I know one of the leaders of the Proud Boys, I believe he's African Cuban. So there's a guy with a Confederate flag in the White House waving it. And there's clearly a white supremacist element to it, but there are also different types of folks. And how do you talk about that? When it's like, this is white supremacy, period. Does that ring true to you, or do you struggle a little bit with that title because so many other members don't fit into that, or is that irrelevant?
I think it's an important question. There's a couple ways to look at it. I mean, one way is there's one argument that's like, basically, in every kind of a repressive social movement, there is, especially ones based on race, there are people of color who internalize the racism so much that they effectively become what some people call race traitors. So they identify with white people, for example. They want to be one. There's an aspirational quality to it, and a lot of times, this is a hunch. You know, I can look at people like wealthy Arabs in the United States, and they're probably immigrants. They're probably Muslims, and they became successful either because they inherited money or they successfully started a business, and they tend to align themselves with the conservative right, and they tend to distance themselves from the community of people from their homeland in the country that they're in that they see as immigrants, and they didn't work as hard as me, blah blah blah. So I did this. Okay.
Also, they're outwardly Arab. Optically, they're not going to invite them to their golf club. Right?
Yes, and then you see a lot of times the anglicization of their names and so on. So I think there are people there is an argument that there's maybe something persuasive about it, but there are people who just sort of become race traitors. There's another way to look at it, which is that the left in the US, not even the left, just the socially liberal, progressive, maybe even just centrist, is radically reductionist when it thinks about race. And there's a right way for a Black person. There's the right political positions for a Black person. There's the right political positions for a Latino person. There's the right political position for Arabs. And if you don't follow those, then you are a race traitor, an Uncle Tom, whatever, self-hating Arab. And, you know, you see this a lot with Jewish people or Israelis who are critical of Israel. They call them self-hating Jews. Okay? But the truth is that to be Black or Mexican in this country is not some homogenous category that you can just make a broad, sweeping claim about, you know? For certain people, race, ethnicity, whatever, can be very salient, and sometimes it's not so salient. And so this is all just to say that I think it will take time for us to understand the dynamics of the people who see themselves as, you know, people of color who are part of this movement. I don't think personally that they're self-hating people of color.
Yeah.
And the complicated thing about these movements is they're not like evangelical Christians of the right. Like I think they probably are to a certain degree accepting of gay people. You know, so there are, you know, several people part of the movement that are gay, and
That's right.
And I think they're see themselves as like they're colorblind racists, basically. They don't see color, you know. So I think that the easy way out is to say that they're self-hating. The more complicated thing is to try to understand how race may or may not be an important factor within the movement.
Right. Going back, it's interesting what you said about the left and its approach to kind of race and diversity, because I've mostly find it laughable. Like when Hillary Clinton was running, she just brings a bunch of brown people up front. You know, most of it is optical, but
tokenizing.
Yeah, tokenizing. But going digging deeper into this, it was shocking to see. And do you think that, for me, it feels incredibly impactful and significant right now, culturally and as a society, like where we're heading after this. Do you see that same impact? Like, do you sense a shift in how we're going to kind of go forward when we talk about this?
Well, let me just say one thing before I answer that, which is that I just want to add that there can be no doubt that there was a strong element of white supremacy to all of this. There can be no doubt that, you know, when someone is wearing a shirt that's like glorifying concentration camps, you know, Auschwitz, there's no doubt that there's a element of potent anti-Semitism to all of this. So I think it's super important. I don't want to dismiss that, because it is a real thing and it is consequential.
And that anti-Semitism kind of applies to all people, right? Like, and also let's be clear, anti-Blackness also can apply to all people. Like you can be from any ethnicity, and be anti-Black.
You can be Black and be anti-Black. So I just wanted to say that. So then the next question is like, what is the consequence of this on the zeitgeist?
Right, because I mean, we knew after 9/11, we knew what was coming. Like we saw that.
I'm not sure, Usama. Like, the thing about 9/11 is you had the perfect other to.
You don't think Trumpsters are the perfect other? I mean, they label themselves with the.
I don't think so.
Is it because it's too embedded? I mean, this is the issue, right? Like you can vilify Muslims, right? I mean, you know, and it's like the number one targets become women with hijabs and Sikh men that have nothing to do with their religion because they're visibly, they look other.
Right.
But there are senators and representatives and lawyers and police chiefs and police officers. It's interesting to me that the police officers that they killed served in Iraq. He was a military vet. You know, I mean, in all other aspects on the outside, he seems like he would be a hero to these right-wing extremists.
Right.
And they bashed his head with a fire extinguisher, and that's how he goes.
Right.
And when the other looks like mainstream America, when the other looks like conventional America, when the other looks like, you know, their so-called son, neighbor, blah, 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 right? So, but these people are humanized and they're known and they're bold in what they're doing, because I don't think any of them are really afraid. The guy that drove into a bunch of Black Lives Matter protester got like a year probation and was told to be nice.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at some of the jail terms. It's like a year, 6 months probation. And to me, I don't, like any other, like I want someone to go with CGI and replace all these people with like Black folks and women with hijabs. And like just, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like Black bodies storming the US Capitol? They would, like Trump would nuke the place.
It would be a massacre. I think there's a recognition of more and more broadly in the mainstream media and your like average liberal, that if this had been Black people, people of color, there would have been a massacre. And there's just a disproportionately different type of response to these things. So I think that one of the consequences of this is positive, in that it's just very self-evident now, the two different standards by which, you know, people, you know, the state responds to protest or any kind of collective action. But going back to the like cops, and there's this cop and he served in Iraq and then he's getting crushed by a door and all this other stuff. There's a weird sort of contradiction in American society, especially, it exists on the left, but it really exists on the right, which is like, so at once you have this just glorification of authority, like cops and the military and this language of law and order. And it's like, just, you know, that's the law, and you don't question the law even if it doesn't make sense. And cops are just, you know, soldiers are heroes and all this stuff. At the same time, you have a fixation, obsessive fixation with rugged individualism.
That's right.
You know, liberty, all these other things. And these things do not go together well. And what you saw, I think, a couple of days ago was the just like explosion of those two things.
Yeah. I agree.
You know?
Yeah. And you know, there's also been videos circulating of cops taking selfies.
Yeah.
There's one where I saw some police officers actually removing the barricade.
I saw that too, yeah.
I don't understand, you know, when Munir was really young, we used to go to this place called Bouncy World or Jump World. I don't remember. It's these big things for kids. And just kids running around, jumping. It's just fun. It was a Sunday afternoon. And there was a guy, a white skinny dude with a t-shirt that said infidel in Arabic with some gun or something. And that's the thing about all of this, is that it's become so normalized. Like imagine if I walked around and be like, kill Whitey. And I'm at like Disneyland, you know? I'm at like, you know, like McDonald's and getting a kiddie meal for my children.
Right.
And I have a t-shirt that like, you know, like blonde people should be lined up and shot. You know, I mean, that's that bold. It's like, oh, it's in Arabic. Oh, he doesn't like, you know, like, oh, those people, they just hate Muslims. Like, they just hate Muslims. Like,
right.
You know, and then I could just turn on the radio and be like, get them all and hang them and shoot them down. If you see a Muslim in the grocery store, beat him up. And this has been going on forever and nothing happens. And part of me thinks, okay, they're going to go, you know, Trump will be caught up in litigations and lawyers and this and that. I have no idea.
I don't think any of that's going to happen.
Even that.
Yeah.
I think he's protected. I think his family's protected. And I don't even know what's going to happen to these people. I think Americans are sympathetic. I think they see themselves in these people. And they're like that woman crying. I don't know why she was rubbing herself with an onion. She's like, I got tear-eyed. They're like, I got tear gas. They're like, what are you here for? To overthrow the government for a revolution? Like, oh, okay. Right. And like, again, like switch it. What if it was a Latino woman? Or what if it was a Black guy saying, we're here to overthrow the government? Yeah. You know? I mean, he'd have trouble leaving his house, you know? But this stuff they're excused. And I'm not asking for blood, but I just think it's like we need to be careful. Two things. One, not to inadvertently suddenly, start screaming about law and order, be like, hey, get those people. And also at the same time, to not reconcile and be like, hey, we all need to reach across the aisle and hug, and in many regards, the right wing has been very good at organizing and having a clear ideology, as fucked up as it is.
Right.
And on the left, it's what? I mean, it's interesting because in the 60s, a lot of these counterculture movements were all leftist. I was bringing up Bill Ayers from the Weather Underground. I mean, they were setting off bombs in federal buildings, and it was the left that were seen as they were screaming revolution and wrapping themselves in the American flag.
Right.
And this kind of new sort of neo-pagan hippie guys with beards, it used to be when we were young punks, you could see the skinheads because they were skinheads.
Right. Right.
Now I don't even know. I mean, I don't know. In fact, I've had even someone that I know from Chicago that kind of embraced some of that conspiracy theater, but it's theories, but it's wrapped up in New Age nonsense. And
it's a big thing.
And it's weird. I just think we're in a messier, weirder time. And I agree that there is an element of white supremacy, neo-Nazi, all that stuff is still there, but something else. It's this kind of disinformation. And I talked about this earlier. When we can't agree on reality anymore, then any reality is acceptable. That, oh, this is my news channel and this is what it's telling me. When I talked to that lady outside that was on my street, like, she was screaming, Biden won. And she almost had tears and anger in her eyes. And I don't think she's nuts. I think she's—
Biden lost?
Biden lost, Trump won, and we're all duped.
Yeah.
And she was almost crying because she's like looking at me like I'm the idiot.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, remember when the internet first started? It was like very idealized. There's this whole notion of like, we're going to become a global community, a global village, and we can share information and we'll all get smarter. And like, it was all about sharing and cooperating and being part of this bigger community. And what we get is a flat earth society.
Yeah.
We are stupider, we are dumber because of this. And like Google during the last election, they had kids in Eastern Europe making up articles because they could sell ads about pizza parlors with pedophile rings and Hillary Clinton. And a guy actually came with a gun being like, what's going on? Yeah. Instead of shooting. Like there's consequences to this. So, I mean, Google sold ads to these people. Facebook gave them platforms. Twitter gave them platform. Twitter's acting right now that it's doing something good. Trump has been making stuff up for years. It doesn't serve them anymore.
Right.
And I think that that's also a big part of it, is this disinformation. I mean, these people are convinced that this stuff is real. Otherwise, they wouldn't put themselves out there.
Right.
Do you think there's an element of that too?
Yeah. So, well, it's funny that you brought up like, the counterculture of the 1960s and the new left and so on, because one thing that people haven't been paying attention to is in the 1970s, in the wake of the countercultural revolution and the proliferation of cults in the US, in the 1970s, there was a cottage industry of something called deprogramming.
That's right. It was the thing.
So it's like, I spent the last 5 years on acid and living in a commune in LA, and I don't know what is real. I don't know what's going on. And there was a whole industry, real industry created to deprogram people and bring them back to reality. And, I don't know enough about it, but it seems that like that could be something that might have to happen again. And so the thing is like, okay, we are in a new. What's happening now is new, but it's not without precedent. Yeah. So I'm gonna get a little sociological theory on this. So like take in the 1930s, a group of Jewish German intellectuals, Adorno and Horkheimer and Marcuse and a few other people, they were part of something called the Frankfurt School.
Yeah.
And they advanced a kind of what the actual cultural Marxism, not the stupid stuff people talk about now. But so it's a couple ideas. One idea was called reification. And reification is the idea that, and so the Frankfurt School's most famous idea was called the culture industry. Okay. And so the idea was that, Karl Marx spent too much time focused on the economic structure of society and how that organized the whole social system, and not enough on the ideational or cultural elements like media production, all these other things, because at the time he was writing, those things weren't as important. But the Frankfurt School is trying to figure out, how the fuck did the Holocaust happen? How did the Nazis come into power? And they're like, it's not just alienated people searching for meaning. It's a very complex media apparatus that becomes constitutive of a reality. So reification is the idea that capitalism sort of, through the media, through the press, through things like they pointed out the simplicity of Hollywood movies, the narrative structure, the way that time moves, you move through time, the way that all music is just a bunch of very simple conventions, effectively stunts people's critical faculty. So if you're just presented all the time with information that is so easy to consume, that requires no interpretive skill whatsoever, your ability to see through various kinds of representations is stunted. And then the world as it is shown to you seems real and given and self-evident. And so the Nazis create, all of this art, these films, these radio programs, this simplistic music, and people think that that is what the world is. And so take that basic idea of reification and culture industry, and could you even just imagine what they would say about the world today, where you are just bombarded with images and various kinds of representation, and that requires very little ability to think through what you are seeing. And I think there is a very just basic lack of information or media literacy that exists. And
sure. And it's a good point. And you want to continue? I'm sorry.
No. I mean, so I just think that what's happening is new, but it's not without precedent.
Right.
And, I think when someone watches, the problem is that it's also true for someone that watches CNN all day long.
That's the thing. I wanted to just make a comment on what you said about media literacy, and now more than ever, the kind of the inability to be critical of what they're consuming. I teach film, and one of the things I like to do is I ask students, like, what's your favorite film? And they'll tell me. And one student said, hey, my favorite film is American Sniper. Clint Eastwood, just total propaganda film, rewriting of history. And I said, why? And he said, it's realistic. And that's, I think, what gets to it is that it's a culture where emotions take hold. And if it feels right, it is the truth, right? And just going back what you were saying about the Holocaust, and we're talking about the internet and disinformation. One of the greatest disinformation campaign was the Elders of Zion,
right?
A fictional book that was even reprinted in the United States by Ford and spread. I mean, so newspapers and books and publishing companies have been at this for a while. There's a whole industry that makes a lot of money off of these kind of right-wing propaganda places. These extremist radio hosts and stuff make money off of this, okay? And they may be making money, and they may be, we could be cynical, be like, well, they don't really believe it, But those people are protected. Whether they believe it or not, they're not going to get scratched in this. They're not going to jail. Rush Limbaugh is not, nothing's going to happen to him, but he can get on the air and say pretty much whatever he wants and make up whatever he wants. We know that American mainstream media is corporate based. That is, they need to make money. During the last elections, the head of CNN said, hey, we gave more airtime to Trump than anyone else. We don't like him, but it generates income. And I think there's that. Like every product in America, every movie, every news station, everything is judged by how successful it is financially, right? And so, and I get it. They need to stay alive, but they enhance this. Yeah. And the spectacle that I was talking about, it's like, it's horrifying, but what happens? If any of those guys, like the guy that's sitting on Nancy Pelosi's desk, if he just gets a slap on the wrist, do you think folks will be okay with that? Because I don't.
I think that, no, I don't think people will be okay with it, but I don't think it'll go any further than that.
Yeah.
I also think Americans have like the shortest attention span ever. And so like, just like the next things that happens will change it. And I mean, this is a complicated thing. So like, the question is, how does a society that's come out of a fairly like repressive, violent, politically repressive era, how does it move forward? So you have an issue, which is, what do you do with the people that abuse power? How do you deal with them? Because it's not so obvious, because if Biden goes in and tries to lock up Trump and Ted Cruz and all these other people, it actually can become far more like you could start a war doing that, okay? At the same time, if you just forget about it and let everyone go and just try to, just forget it, there's no accountability for any actions. It sends a message that you can basically get whatever you want. And it also it leaves victims of these things with no recourse. So this is the classic problem of something that they call transitional justice. So, in a much more extreme context, the countries emerging out of socialism and communism in the Eastern Bloc had to deal with this in the 80s.
Yeah.
South Africa in the 1990s. Rwanda in the mid-1990s. And
I liked what South Africa did.
Okay, if you liked it, but you should know that, as someone who studied this a lot, a large deal of the victims of apartheid felt like they got nothing out of this because there was a blanket amnesty.
Yeah.
Okay, blanket amnesty. So you had to go and you had to confess your crimes and say what you did. Other places did something called vetting, which is you had to go in front of this committee and they investigated how did you participate in the regime, what thing did you do, except those things can be weaponized against just anyone's political opponents. So Iraq, they had de-Baathification, which was a giant disaster.
We know how that went.
So
and also the person,
some people call this the torturer problem. Like, what do you do with these people?
Right.
And the problem is there's no good answer. At one register, the victims or the society itself is left without any real recourse. On the other hand, if you go after everybody, you're going to cause a different set of problems.
Mm-hmm. Someone, I read something be like, we should treat these extreme Trumpsters the way Muslims were treated after 9/11. Again, strange comparison.
So litigious. It's so interesting to me because
suddenly, yeah,
it's like it's so it just shows like this deep paradox in the American society.
It is, and then there there's this issue is like, well, who do you prosecute? Are the folks outside the Capitol the ones trying to get in, or the ones that actually made it in? And what are their crimes? And what does that mean in a broader issue? Because to me, it's not just those people. It's a culture, it's an environment, it's a system, it's an industry that profits off of this. It's right-wing radio, it's Fox News, it's books, it's publishing, it's the NRA, it's guns, it's weapon gear, it's you know, and it's an ideology that believes that America, as we know it, is heading in a direction that these people don't agree with, and there's a deep problem, and it seems very much wrapped in conspiracy theories. And Trump's funny. Like he has access to the FBI, the CIA, and Secret Service, and all this information that most people can't get. But he uses the language of deep state. He uses the language of Rush Limbaugh and Fox News to talk about these things. And I don't think he's as big of a dummy as people think. Like I think that's calculated to some degree. He might believe it. It's definitely much more convenient to believe something like a deep state or QAnon than, you know, actual facts. I mean, for him, it was his acceptance speech. It was more important to emphasize Islamic terrorism and to never, ever demean white supremacists or those people that marched at Charlottesville. And people, you know, the press are always scratching their heads. They're like, why won't you apologize? Why won't you say something? And when he was debating with Biden, he goes, Proud Boys, step back and step aside. And he never will. Because I think he is their leader. That's him. And I just think there's things that are muddled and difficult to decipher, and other things are just really clear.
Yeah.
We're having trouble accepting it. Like,
well, I mean, I think it's clear that Trump is a racist. Like a bona fide bigot.
Many people will argue. There are many people who will argue with you and be like, he can't be a racist because blank, blank, blank. You know.
I think he's like a very different racist than the like. I don't know, just like redneck evangelical of 1980s. I mean, right. But he's. I mean, I would push back on you. I don't think I think he is about as much of a dummy as anyone could possibly be. Like, I don't think he understands the nature of government.
I do think he's a dummy, but I don't think when he talks about deep state and stuff like that, I think he's not like,
believe that.
He does believe it. And I think he is speaking in code, not in code. He's speaking openly to these people that support him. You know, he's saying, he told them, I love you. We love you. So you're right. I don't think he's a dummy. No, I do think he's a dummy, but I don't think he's so stupid that he's just going along with these people because they support him. And sometimes he's framed that way, that he's not going to demean these people because they're holding Trump flags. Mm-hmm. But I believe the reason that they're holding Trump flags is because he started his campaign saying we need to ban Muslims and go after and these Mexicans are, they're bringing in the rapists and all this stuff. Like that got them all excited, these extremist groups. And he knows that. And even though it's fringy and small, and maybe he could have like cast himself broader to the Republican Party, I don't think he really likes them. Like the generic. He likes these folks because they're.
He likes people that like him.
But is it?
But he, I don't think. I mean, I think he sees them as like low class and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Deep state is a very funny concept because, I was in an Uber not a long time ago, and the driver was like telling me how the app is tracking him, which is actually true. And it is like, it does use the like GPS data to figure out if you're speeding and all the other kinds of things, which is all true. And then from that truth expands outward to some insanity. So like he starts telling me about the deep state and all the people that are in control and who's doing what to him and how there's, they're trying to implant chips in your brain and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, who are they? You keep using this word, they.
Yeah.
And then, he doesn't have an answer. And then I tell him, like, it doesn't seem very deep if you know everything about it. Like, you have it all figured out.
Yeah.
And, of course there's no answer. But I would wager, and this is going to be a very unpopular thing to say, the same kind of social abstraction exists on the left, which is, it's not the deep state, it's capitalism.
Yeah.
So
it's the dirty word for everything.
So like, if you look at like the old anthropology of religion, like there's a basic argument that, you know what a totem pole is?
Yeah.
So basically the idea is there's this impersonal, abstract, invisible world that you cannot control, okay? And so what people do is they transpose that onto something that they can physically manifest. In this case, the totem pole, something that they can see and touch and say it's right there. So if you take that idea and say, okay, there's this whole world and I can't control what's going on, and there's these invisible forces around me, blah, 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 it's the deep state. If you're on the left, it's the same thing. The world is something I can't manage. All of these things are happening around me that I don't have any control over. It's capitalism. Of course, both things just completely hide your just lack of knowledge about what's going on.
That's right.
And I think it's funny.
It is funny. And also, I just don't think, like conspiracy theories, I just don't think people are that organized,
No, they're not.
But yeah, I do agree with you about capitalism, and there's a whole thing to unpack, huh?
Let me just say real quick, I'm writing a book and a dissertation on how the war in Iraq happened. And I've interviewed almost all of the architects of the war, the people that had the ideas, that did all of this work over a 10-year period. The war is not something that just happens after 9/11. There's been planning since the 1990s.
Oh, yeah.
There is no possible way, like once you've learned who these people are and how government works, there could ever be a conspiracy so deep and complex. It's all right there in front of you.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's all right there in front of you, and also it's always been there.
Yeah.
It's just who decides to highlight it and to make something of it.
You can go online right now and find documents from the CIA on, overthrowing governments in Latin America.
Oh, yeah.
You can read the Snowden documents on the NSA spying on people. It's not, none of this stuff is a secret. This is just what states do.
Yeah, they assassinated Black Panther leader. They're not, and they're and it just comes out later, years later, 20 years later, we did this. We're very sorry. I guess what feels a little bit different about this now, and maybe more dangerous, is that just the lack of police presence, the sense that the police and the military is kind of part of them secretly agree with this, that these people, because they have the symbols and the slogans and the language, and again, they look familiar to them.
Yeah. I think there's plenty of they're their brothers.
Yeah. It was just amazing. America has a lot of fucked up problems, but one of the things that we could all agree on is that if someone says we need to put these people down, we have weapons and ammunition, all those tanks and armory and weapons that they built for war are all in police departments now.
Yeah.
We could blow out any city in any country at any time if we wanted to, and they just sat on it and let this happen. To me, that's kind of like if you want to talk conspiracy theory and paranoia, there's something there, I think. How did this happen? I know Trump withheld from calling the National Guard, and there was like pressure, you got to call the National Guard. I think the Trump or the president's the only one that can do it. And then I read some article that said they didn't even have weapons. They were just kind of there to like crowd control and stuff. And yes, there's a lot about the hypocrisy. If this was Black Lives Matter, I think you and I were clear on that. There's no argument there. But it does show that this kind of sentiment is embedded, and that I just don't think a lot of Americans see what happened as criminal. And we could even make an argument, like if you want to say this was a revolutionary, I don't agree with the ideology, and that there's some value to that. If the ideology is justified, like if it was truly something criminal or illegal or unethical went on, and it had something to do with our country, then someone could make a justification. I mean, I would have liked to see something like that happen when we decided to attack Iraq and made a justification and said, well, 9/11 happened and we think Iraq has something to do with it. I wish millions of Arabs and Muslims stormed the Capitol and being like, this is a lie. And we need to point out, you're going to kill children, innocent children. But what's at stake is nothing. Yeah. It's disinformation, but I don't think it really matters underneath it all. What I really think it is an America that's unrecognizable to a lot of these folks, where they're hung up on these cultural movements, not even movement, just a natural progression of where America's heading. They're still upset about transgender people. They're still caught up in like, colleges are teaching them that there's no boys and girls, that gender is just fluid and you can be any, and like they're caught up in these things that has just been a natural, like a normal progression of a smart society that's trying to be more accepting of and understanding of all people, right? And this is this pushback they've somehow wrapped up in conspiracy theory. All of us professors are complicit in this, like we're all part of this grand scheme, when we're just teaching, like, we're just teaching what's going on. And I know I'm kind of babbling about this. I just think that there's a generalized hatred for mainstream America by some of these fringe movements, because mainstream America is becoming much more diverse and much more complicated. It's not just one or two voices. And, why do you think they go after Ilhan Omar or, the squad that they call them? They're women of color, they're Muslims, they're people that they're not used to normally having power. And we pretend like we say all these things in America, everyone has the right to do this, anyone could become president, anyone could become senator, but we rarely see it. And now we're seeing a little bit of this.
Right.
We have laws and policy, and I think it's something about that, and maybe something more, and maybe it's something we'll never understand. But there was rage in their eyes when they were storming. Like, they seem adamant and determined to do like something. They really believed that something was going to happen.
Yeah.
And they're everywhere. And I used to think like that every voice, every opinion, like we should give it a chance. I don't think that anymore.
It's complicated.
What?
It's complicated because I'm not sure that we actually want a situation where there's no right-wing radio or just views that are extremely off-putting. I mean, this is sounds like I'm a high school civics teacher, but like,
let's sit down and talk to the neo-Nazis.
No, I just mean that there is no possible situation in a society with 300 million people that there is going to be any kind of, like, there's always going to be extremities of viewpoints with a general majority consensus somewhere in the center, but you just have to be able to deal with people that are radically different than you and see the world radically different than you. It's, I don't know, I'm very conflicted about, like, you know, do we ban like neo-Nazi movements in the United States?
Well, we're not going to.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, and I always come back to the same thing, which is that every argument used against white power and KKK people is used against the people who criticize Israel. And, you know, Zoom, for example, deplatforming Palestinian activists from talking. And the problem is that you can't have it both ways. Like, when it's your movement, you don't want it to happen, right? So, and I know that this is a very, like, this is something that's just been rehashed a million times, but it is nevertheless true that there's going to be things out there that you just find disgusting and horrible, and we don't have to support them, but I don't know if, like, the idea is banning them or anything like that. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for it. I know it's complicated.
It's hard.
Nazi Germany would have been a lot better off without Nazis, right? So I don't know, but it's a complicated question. I just think it's worth dealing with the complexity of the issue and trying to figure out something. I do think it's like, I have no problem with a private company deplatforming Trump. At the same time, I have a real problem with a private company deplatforming Palestinian activists.
Right.
And I don't know, I cannot reconcile the two things.
Right.
Any argument I would have to make for the Palestinians, I would also have to give to Trump, for example.
Right. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. And I think you brought up that argument. It's like, are we not sending them further into the fringes?
I mean, I'd rather know what they're saying and doing.
Mm-hmm. I just think it's also interesting that early on, when he was like openly talking about going after, I mean, he gave an interview. He's like, you know, Islam hates us. It's like, what the hell is that? You know? And I'm not, and again, that's like, you know, the argument about, yes, you can say whatever you want. But if you have power, and that power can motivate people, where is that responsibility? So every time Trump I'd follow, he'd say something demeaning to Muslim, you wait a few days and there'd be a rise of anti-Muslim attacks in the United States. Yeah. So there is a correlation. So is that screaming fire in a theater? To an extent it is. But I could see what you're saying, like, can a Palestinian activist make a statement that could be interpreted a certain way? But I just think if somebody like him has that much power, and
I agree. It's all about the access to power.
Yeah. And I also just want to emphasize that when there's a general consensus that this has gone too far, a lot of the media companies and certain politicians and spokespeople kind of get in line with that. But when it's not generally accepted that this is outrageous, so when he's like, Muslims should be banned, it wasn't enough to hurt mainstream America. It wasn't affecting most folks, regardless of where they fell on the political spectrum. It wasn't enough. Yeah. It wasn't enough for journalists to keep bringing it up. It's just something people do. It just became something Trump says. And even Republicans were excusing it, be like, well, that's just Trump on Twitter. That's how he talks. And there was this kind of casual dismissal of a lot of this stuff. I saw a video of Trump and his son and his family, like watching, like,
Yeah, I saw that.
Like as if they were watching, like sitting on their hill, like watching the people, like, you know, on monitors take over the government and laughing about it. I'm not sure what they expected. Like, did they?
They weren't watching people rioting yet. They were watching.
I know they were watching, but like, if they brought Nancy Pelosi out and hung her and everyone cheered and everyone bowed down to Trump, like, and he became our new God King, and suddenly, like, all these fringe people.
I could see it happening, man. I
could see him going, yes, we did it, and completely, like, taking over, and he would do it. And maybe part of his silly cartoon brain thought that.
Yeah.
And ironically, how quickly he shifted. You could always tell, like, there's the real Trump, which is like, we love you, this election. Here, I wrote some of it. I didn't read it. I just copied some of it. I just want to read it real quick. He goes, so we're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania Avenue. Or we're going to the Capitol. We're going to try to give, the Democrats are hopeless. They're never voting for anything, not even one vote. But we're going to try and give our Republicans the weak ones, because the strong ones don't need any of our help. We're going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country. Then he goes off about, let's go down there, whatever. But I had a point. I just got lost in it.
Well, also his speech. I mean,
just real quick,
when the riots started happening, he sends out a tweet that this is what happens.
That's right.
And I was like, wow, that is fucking nuts.
No, it's like,
and then he sends out a video that the election was stolen. Stop rioting, but the election was stolen.
That's right. But you could always tell the real Trump, which is like, we love those people and all that. And I'm like, he's going, hey, everyone, go out and riot, because I'm telling you the election is stolen. Go out and riot. So everyone does that. And he's like, see, what can I do? The people have spoken. But then when there's like the apology, when he's like, bad boy Trump, here's your speech. When he gets on and he reads it off the teleprompter, he's like, go, this is wrong. You will be arrested. This is a blah, 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 blah. He doesn't believe that. Yeah. That's just what he has to do, you know. But if someone sat him down, he loved all of this.
I would do anything to be like a fly in the White House right now, just to see his inability to communicate in the way that he likes. I mean, he has a press secretary. He could call CNN right now and be on the news if he wanted, but he doesn't have Twitter. He doesn't have any of these platforms anymore. And I just want to know what it's like in there. I would do anything to know what it's like in there. I have to run, Usama.
All right, man. It was nice chatting with you, Usama.
Thank you.
All right, bye.